Welcome back, and now let's finish this series of videos describing the empire, which I will be a little more brief with than the first two. Again, just to put it in context with Virgil and Ovid. So, although the empire de facto is in place from 43 BC with the onset of the Second Triumvirate that basically eclipses any power of the Senate and the consuls. The date that we often point to as the real establishment of the empire, the way we think of it, is 27 BC. The reason for that is that Octavian, after the assassination of Caesar, and then later after the completion of the civil wars with first Lepidus and then Antony, actually spent a lot of his time away from Rome. And he had a lot of influence and loyalty that he had carried with both the Roman soldiers and with many of the populaces of the various provinces of the Roman Republic. So by the time he came back to Rome, which was actually a few years after the defeat of Mark Antony, he had quite a following with him. So when he finally returned, he received in 27 BC the two official titles. One was Pater Patriae, which is basically the father of his country, which basically indicated that he had been the savior of the Roman state, and the other was the title Augustus, that he and later emperors became known for, the revered one, and that's in fact the name that he comes to be known by, and he becomes the first emperor. Augustus did quite a bit to transform the city of Rome, including rebuilding it. Famously, he said that he founded a city of brick and left it a city of marble. And he did quite a bit also to sponsor the arts and to reestablish literature as an important Roman occupation, and music, and quite a few other things. And he wrote a document called the Res Gestae, his exploits, that describes in detail, with of course some elaboration and ornamentation, many of his accomplishments, and so that gives us some idea of what he actually did accomplish, even though again we have to be careful of his propagandistic approach to it. Now, again, we were talking before about the need for the Romans, Romanitas, to justify the empire. So it's here where Augustus turns to these poets, Virgil and Ovid, that we're going to discuss in upcoming videos for chapters 19 and 20. What Augustus is trying to do is to have literature that matches Greek literature in quality. And that means in particular that the Romans are looking at the various genres of literature, like epic poetry and drama and lyric poetry and such, that the Greeks wrote, and trying to demonstrate that they can convert the Greek genres into the Roman genres and make them as good as the Greeks, and maybe in some ways even better. One of the difficulties the Romans would have in doing that is that the Roman language, Latin, was quite simplified in vocabulary in many cases in comparison to the Greek language. We have a complaint about that from an earlier poet, Lucretius, who wrote a work called On the Nature of Things, De Rerum Natura. He was found himself handicapped because frequently what he wanted to say in Latin, he could not, that was taken from Greek, he couldn't express properly in Latin. He complained about the paucity of the language. So Latin was not an easy language to compose in for that and for other reasons. But Virgil and Ovid were both extraordinarily skilled at it, and they excelled especially in epic poetry and also another form of poetry called elegiac that grew up especially during the Hellenistic times in the ancient Greek world. So much of Roman literature that we see is influenced by this sort of black hole period where we have some literature, but not as much as in the earlier days of classical period. The Hellenistic period after the death of Alexander the Great in 322 BC. We're aware of what was going on with literature and do have some surviving examples of it in order to know what the Romans were modeling much of their literature after. So Virgil, of course, models his epic directly after Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. And in fact, Virgil was even called by the Roman poet Propertius another Homer producing another Iliad, essentially. Ovid based a lot of his works on a lot of Near Eastern mythology, as well as mythological sources and documents that we know of from the Hellenistic times. And he combined all the myths that he could find and fit in that he knew of into one grand work, the Metamorphoses. And he used the theme of transformation, which is what metamorphosis refers to. It could be a person transforming into something else, like an animal or a plant, a rock or something, but also the historical transformation of the world from creation somewhat reminiscent of Hesiod's creation, through a whole long series of gradual evolutions of humanity and the animal kingdom, with humans making a lot of mistakes on the ways and getting punished in various ways by the gods and others, and then finally emerging at last into the proto-historical period for the Romans, the Trojan War with Aeneas, and gradually going through the early Roman king period, through the Republic, and finally the Empire. So this is all what emerges from the early days of the empire, and a lot of what it's aiming to accomplish is to demonstrate that the Romans really are a grand people who belong in power as they have arrived there, even though they recognize many of the unfortunate sacrifices, like for instance Queen Dido of Carthage in Virgil's Aeneid, that had to happen along the way. The Romans clearly are not totally comfortable with the fact that it took so much negativity to get them in power the way they did, but when you consider this result versus other possible results, it appears to come off as justified. And so that's a lot of what's created. So the empire stretched from 43 BC or 31 BC or 27 BC, depending on where you want to date it, down into the mid AD 400, when finally Rome itself was conquered in the west. And actually, there were remnants of the Roman Empire that stretched all the way down to 1453 BC, AD, sorry, which is the fall of Constantinople, because in time Roman power switched from the west to the eastern world, and as the west declined, the eastern world grew up. You had the Byzantine Empire and later Middle Age rules out there. And again, the last remnant of the Roman Empire is extinguished in AD 1453 with the fall of Constantinople. So what makes the empire distinctly different from the Republic, despite Augustus's pained efforts to try to suggest that it was a smooth transition, is that the Senate is still there, the consuls are still there, all the other offices are still there. However, the emperor essentially is the one who has now the imperium, that's the Latin word for the power, to make all of the decisions. And what Augustus also does is to have his power, imperium, termed maius, M-A-I-U-S, which means greater imperium. That means he now has superior power to all of the other offices in Rome, and he also has a special capacity that Roman Republican leaders such as Caesar didn't have, and that is to transfer imperium from Rome throughout all of the provinces outside of Rome. The problem that Caesar ran into with the Rubicon, the reason why he got into civil war with Pompey, was that he had imperium in Gaul, but he could not bring that back into Italy, and that was the reason why he had to disband his army, supposedly. And so by going across the Rubicon River, the boundary between Gaul and Italy, he flouted that rule, and that's how he ended up declaring civil war on the Republic, and particularly on Pompey. So in order to avoid all that, Augustus, realizing that as emperor he would need to be able to traverse the empire freely without all this logistics and red tape, had his power declared maius. And as a result, he now was able to go anywhere he wanted to freely, and that is really what establishes the sole rule that the emperor had. But the term princeps means first citizen, and that is the term that is used at pains to ensure that the position of emperor would never be confused with the position of king, rex, in the sense that there was in fact an advisory board, the Senate, meant to keep the emperor in check, and there was of course the military guard around the emperor, the Praetorian Guard, that were there to supposedly to keep him safe. However, if the emperor got a little bit out of control, maybe a little bit manic, then the Praetorian Guard might be there to basically say to the emperor, I think your time has come to step down. Why don't we take care of you, by assassination, and let somebody else take your place now. And so that's what the Praetorian Guard was very good at doing if things ever got a little too out of control with the emperor. All right, so that's just, as I say, a quick overview of the empire. We will be coming back and talking more about it in a later video, but this gives you a basic overview of Roman history so that you can put in context Virgil and Ovid, who are the authors at the end of the Republic and the beginning of the empire. Okay, so we'll see you in the next session as we get into Virgil and his grand epic work, Aeneid. We'll see you next video.